Okay, good morning. Going to do a video for, I think it's chapter 25, where the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution, and I don't know, it's probably late for the Scientific Revolution, but it's a period in European history where it seems like everything is revolutionary. And that does kind of make me suspicious, just a little bit. I was looking through the discussions, and they seem to be going very well. It's sometimes really hard to divorce yourself from this idea of Eurocentrism, because it really has become sort of the ground that that we all walk on, kind of. I have this book here. It's called The Origins of the Modern World by Robert Marx. Marx with a K. Can you see that? Marx with a K. And he does the best description, or the best description that I've seen of this, what Eurocentrism comes to mean. Okay? And he likens it sort of to the idea of the Matrix in that franchise, that film franchise. That once you're inside of it, once you've been trained to think Eurocentrically, it's really hard to find a place where you can criticize that ideology. As an example, I had a discussion on New Year's Eve with a guy, a friend of mine, who was at this gathering, a very small gathering, masks and stuff. And I don't know how we got on the subject, but I was talking about the provision in the U.S. Constitution that Congress could not interfere with the international slave trade until 1808. The southern states that had slaves were powerful enough to get that sort of written into the Constitution. And that led to talking about the slave trade and the fact that Africans sold other Africans into slavery. And then he started talking about Western civilization being sort of, yes, bad things happen, basically, it was his argument. But Western civilization is so great that, you have to sort of accept those things. Enslavement, wiping out whole populations inadvertently, whatever. Okay, it's hard for him to sort of get outside of that idea that Western civilization is something very precious, very spectacular, that it's the best system ever. All those things, and you have to think about it, because what does the West in Western civilization mean? Is it cowboys and Indians, that West? No, it's not that West. In fact, it has no geographical meaning whatsoever. It goes back to the Greeks and the Persians, and the Greeks lived to the west of the Persians. The Greeks were in Europe, the Persians were in Asia. And the Greeks sort of worked up this whole ideology that they were more rational than the Persians. They were more democratic than the Persians, even though they did have slaves. Their society was superior to the Persians. And that's where this idea of Western civilization begins. The Greeks are further west than the Persians. It dies out, basically, that once Christianity takes over in Europe, they drive out the Greek philosophers and close their schools and that kind of thing. But it gets reborn in the Renaissance. And people start talking about Western civilization as a superior civilization. And, you know, you can argue about that, I suppose. You can go back and forth about that. But it can't be used as a sort of rationale for all the things that have happened, okay? Because a lot of the things that have happened were purely accidents or had more to do with luck than any facet of, you know, European civilization. And there's also an element of the concept of Western civilization that includes Caucasian people, white people, and excludes anybody else. All right? If I asked you to define a Western country, you might say it's democratic. That would be one thing they would throw up. It's industrialized. Okay. Generally, the state and the religion are separated. There's some kind of separation of church and state. And anything else? I don't know. Is Japan part of Western civilization? No. Why not? They have a democracy. They're industrialized. They all wear business suits. They dress exactly like Westerners. They have transportation systems. All, you know, if you went to Tokyo, somebody from Europe goes to Tokyo or somebody from America goes to Tokyo, they wouldn't understand the language. But they wouldn't understand the language if they went to another country in Europe. But everything else would be the same. The subway would be the same, the sort of weather report, the time. But Japan is not Western. Can't be Western. Why not? Well, because they're not white. Israel, which is in Asia, like Japan, it's the Near East, but not the Far East. Israel is considered part of Western civilization. Why? Because the early settlers there were from Europe and had all of that heritage, quote unquote. Okay? They're democratic, supposedly. They are industrialized, supposedly. They are, you know, they dress in Western suits and da-da-da-da. So the very concept of Western civilization has, at bottom, a racial component. Now, I don't want to argue about that or fight about that, but it's there. In the late 19th century, when you know, the second wave of imperialism gets going, the rationale is very often the white man's burden. That Europeans and Americans are in possession of a superior civilization, and therefore they have the right to impose that civilization on other peoples. And no matter how much force it takes to put that civilization in place on these other people, it's allegedly benefiting those other people. Right? The term is very interesting, white man's burden, because it comes from a poem written by Rudyard Kipling called The White Man's Burden. And it's essentially his advice to Americans on how to deal with their new colony in the Philippines and how to deal with the Filipinos. And it's not an unracist poem by any means. It's kind of imperialist. So, anyway, I was going through the discussions, and I saw that a lot of people had picked up on this idea of God God, gold, and glory, or gold, God, and glory, or glory, God, and gold, however you want to put it. And I'm not sure. I looked through the textbook today, and I really couldn't find that phrase. So I was wondering where it was coming from. I know it's prominent in the textbook I used to use. I think that's a bogus kind of concept. Okay. Yes, there were people whose sole motivation was religious. And Columbus had a sort of, he makes a point of attaching a religious significance to his travels. Okay. In South America, there were all these missionaries, Jesuits and Franciscans, who want to spread the faith and do spread the faith to the Native Americans and set up these new communities and stuff like that. Yes, that all went on. But gold is just the most important motivation, right? Like, gold is here, and then God is here, and glory is here, or glory is here, and God, gold is number one by far. It's like, the Yankees being 24 games ahead at the end of the season. Gold is 24 games ahead at the end of the season. And it's not just gold, of course, it's wealth of any kind. A great example is the Puritans, who were always, they come to Plymouth, and then later larger numbers of them come to Massachusetts Bay Colony. If I ask my students at any time what was their motivation, they will say religious freedom. Yes, the freedom to practice their religion was what motivated them. It takes a while before anybody else is allowed to practice their religion in Massachusetts and other places. But they were part of a private investment corporation, the Plymouth Company or the London Company, I forget which it was. So yeah, they were here to practice their religion, but they also had to find a way to make money, and they did that through fishing and forest products, lumber, tar, pitch, these other things that came from the forests. Most of the forests in England had been reduced to, they'd been killed. They'd been, cut down. So there has to be, you have to have a return on the investment. You can't just be religiously motivated. Now, at the end of there's two sort of waves of imperialism. I'm trying to get the big thinking here. The details are in the textbook, and I think it's pretty well written. I don't know if you guys are enjoying it or not, but I think it's pretty well written. But I want to give you the big overview thing. Okay, now there's two waves of European or Western imperialism. Right. The one starts with Columbus, 1492, maybe a little earlier with the Portuguese going down Africa. You could sort of make an argument for that. All right. Columbus, 1492, Vasco da Gama around Africa to India in 1498. Pick an explorer, and Pizarro, 1533, goes into Peru and conquers the Incas. Cortez, 1521, into Mexico. All right, this first wave of Western imperialism. It kind of starts to drop off with the American Revolution, because people start to say, like, well, this is terrible. We put all this energy and resources into these colonies, and then as soon as they're like ready to pay back, they declare their independence. That's terrible. It's kind of like you guys when, you know, your parents raise you and they clothe you and they feed you and they entertain you and they take you on trips and they pay for soccer camp and summer camp and then 21, 22, you're gone. They pay for your college tuition and then you're gone. It's not the same, but it starts to look like colonies are not a great idea. And then by the 1820s, all of the South American colonies have sort of taken off. So it does look like a dead end, you know, colonialism. That first wave of colonialism or imperialism, whatever you want to call it, a lot of it is based on accidents and luck. Okay. Columbus is lucky. He's like the luckiest man in the world because he runs into the Americas. I'm not going to say discover, but he runs into the Americas. The Americas aren't there. He's going to probably die of thirst somewhere in the middle of the Pacific. He had an idea that the Earth was much smaller than it was. He would never have gotten to China or Japan or any place. All right, so the fact that the Americas are there, totally luck. They didn't know they were there. Okay, and if you think about it, the fact that Europe is where it is means it's likely that Europeans are going to be the first ones to outside of America to discover America. All right, it's less likely that the Chinese will cross the Pacific and get over there, although some people think they did. So the first lucky thing is that the Americas are here. The second lucky thing is that Native Americans don't have immunity to European diseases, and therefore the arrival of even a few Europeans spreads these diseases. And we have some idea, you know, this past year has been, we have some experience with pandemics. But back then they didn't even have an idea about germ theory. So it was just like people started dying, Native Americans started dying by the millions. And that just threw the whole society into an uproar. And it's one of the major things that allows Europeans in large numbers to take over land in the Americas. So at the end of this first phase of Western imperialism, you have settler colonies, French, Dutch, English, Portuguese, Spanish, all in North America and Central America and the Caribbean and South America. They haven't conquered all of the land going west, but they have established footholds in all those areas. Okay? And the third lucky thing is that the Spanish discover enormous amounts of silver and less enormous amounts of gold. Okay, I think with the silver, it's hundreds of thousands of tons of silver that they discover in South America. Silver that then goes to Europe, back to Spain, flows through Spain into England and Holland, and then is used to finance trade with China and places like that. Okay, in the rest of the world, they're not as successful at establishing colonies. They have little trading posts around the coast of Africa and around India. The Portuguese have a city in China, Macau, that they use for trading. But they're not able to conquer India, any part of Africa, or China. Okay? China because it's too strong for the Europeans. India, probably a similar thing. And Africa, the problem in Africa is that there are diseases that will kill white people, malaria and yellow fever and these other diseases in the interior of Africa that the Africans have immunities to at this point. So at the end of this first wave of imperialism, that's the situation. Oh, the Dutch also have a. I guess the Dutch have some settlers in South Africa, and they've also taken over Indonesia, which they call the Spice Islands, and they've turned it into sort of a giant plantation for spices, cinnamon, saffron, pepper, all sorts of things that Europeans like to put on their food. Right? They also build houses that are perfectly suited for Amsterdam at its latitude, and they build the exact same houses in Indonesia, which is like at the equator. It doesn't make any sense, but that's the kind of thing where Western civilization is superior, so we're gonna build this house, this brick house, at the equator, where it doesn't make any sense. Okay. Now, the upshot of this whole endeavor, this whole operation, is that now these streams of wealth that had been moving around, centered on India or the Islamic world or China, now all of these streams are going to Europe. The profits of the Spice Islands, the profits of the trade with China, they're trading it with Indians for cotton fabrics. The profits from that are going to Europe. The profits of the slave trade and other trade in Africa. In the Americas, it's sugar and tobacco and eventually cotton. All of that will be going to Europe. There's this vast influx of wealth into Europe that starts to create completely different social classes. Spain and Portugal basically run their colonies through the crown, through the king, the monarch. Okay, but England, France, and the Dutch all do it through private corporations. If you're an Englishman, say you're a shoemaker in England somewhere, and you make a little extra money, you can invest in a company. You can earn profits off the slave trade without ever leaving your town, and without ever seeing an African, a whip, chains, shackles, having to get on a ship, any of that stuff. All of the ugly shit is over there, and you're getting profits from it. Right? If you go back to the 1100s, the wealthiest people in Europe were the aristocrats, and their wealth was almost entirely in land. But by the 1600s, and certainly by the 1700s, there are all these people they're a new middle class, or the bourgeoisie, or the capitalists. I don't know, there's any number of names for them. But their wealth is in money, and they're attached to this system of capitalism, and investment and that kind of thing. And they're sort of tied into imperialism. Okay? And in a lot of cases, they don't have any political rights because the aristocracy, the nobles, have dominated that for centuries. And that's one of the things that causes this sort of transformation of Europe. I have this textbook I used to use, and maybe this is the last point I'll make here, and then I'll do another one in a day or two. Chapter 20, Barricades, Ballots, and Steam, the Transformation of Europe, 1600 to 1900. Okay. Now, they don't have it. I've looked through this chapter. They don't really tell you what the transformation is, from what to what. The transformation is from feudalism, where aristocrats holding land run the show, okay, to modern capitalism, where people with money and industrial power, industrial might, run the show. And it requires different kinds of government. It requires actually different kinds of religion. There's an argument to be made that Protestantism is much better suited for a literate bourgeois Europe than Catholicism. Catholicism is a religion for a illiterate peasantry. You go into church, they read to you. You see statues, you see stained glass windows. The stories are given to you without you having to read them. But in the Protestant religion, you're expected to be literate and to read the scriptures. Okay. There's styles of dress, styles of eating, all sorts of stuff is going to change. Okay. Now, in that chapter, in that book, they sort of lump together the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution. And over the years, I've asked my classes, well, what is the definition of revolution that covers all of that? Okay. Because he does say in that textbook that the scientific revolution was the Enlightenment is a dazzling something, array of revolutionary social thought. All right. Now, what about barricades, ballots, and steam? Well, in the past, when I've asked my classes about barricades, they get very literal. They'll mention this kind of barricade, or those concrete things that steer you into a certain lane. In this context, it's an evocation of revolution, because in the 18th and 19th centuries, when you had a revolution, you would throw up barricades to keep the king's troops from coming in. And if anybody has seen Les Mis, there's a scene with barricades, and the young kid gets shot there. That's the barricades they're talking about, revolutionary barricades. And indeed, the period from 1600 to 1900 is loaded with revolutions. They're not all terribly successful, though. I think probably the American Revolution is the most successful of the revolutions in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. Right? Now, ballots. What do ballots evoke? Well, ballots are democracy. But democracy really doesn't become part of Western civilization until really the early 20th century in some Western European countries. Right? The French have a revolution in 1789. I think it's like 1804. Napoleon is on the throne as an emperor. No longer democrat. There's no really democracy there. And then they struggled through the whole the whole 19th century trying to figure out how to be democratic. There are periods where they elect the president. There's periods where they elect a king and a president. There's a bunch of different things. And then in England, there's a movement to expand the suffrage to the lower classes. It's called the Chartist movement. They write up this great charter, and they want the vote given to people, well, men mostly, but to people that don't have property. And that's refused right up until the early 1900s. But in none of these countries can women vote. In the United States, blacks in the South can't vote. And outside of France, England, and the United States, and maybe Holland, I'll have to check on that, no place else in Europe is really democratic. Okay? Certainly not Germany or Austria or Spain and in the middle of the 20th century, you get to, with Hitler and Franco in Spain and Mussolini in Italy and non-fascist dictators in other parts of the Europe, Poland, and places like that. Democracy is not a feature of Western civilization until very, very recently. So I don't know about throwing up ballots as a. It's not like the white man's burden included spreading democracy in India or parts of Africa, the Congo, or Kenya, or Tanzania, or Sudwest Africa, which the Germans took over. Okay, that was not the deal. In fact, colonies for the most part are fascist governments. There can be no freedom of speech, no freedom to organize political parties, no unions. You can't open a newspaper. It's like a big prison camp. Because if you did allow those things, you would have an independence movement, and they'd throw you the hell out. Right? And the third one is steam. Okay. Now, linking those things in this chapter in the transformation of Europe, and sort of not connecting it to wealth pouring in from the rest of the world, and not connecting it to, not really being upfront about how long it takes for democracy to grab hold and for revolution to be successful, kind of pumps up the idea that Western civilization is superior. And the best example of that is the Industrial Revolution, which, for the most part, is thought to come like, what is it, Hera who comes out of the head of Zeus? The Industrial Revolution is thought to come out of the minds of these British geniuses, okay, and they just transform the world, okay, and of course it's all positive. Never mind that the next century or so, we're going to deal with the global warming, the climate change that was brought about by the Industrial Revolution. But it's all positive. Oh, we can do so much more, and all that. Again, luck plays a big part, okay? When the British people, when the Angles and the Saxons and these other people, the Jutes, is there Jutes? What's a Jute? When these people all settled in England, they didn't settle in England because it had coal. They settled in England because it was available or whatever the other reasons were. Coal was not the thing. But it happens to be sitting on tons of coal. And Robert Marx says that if he's read studies and stuff like that, if the Chinese had coal, they could have been the start of the Industrial Revolution. Or if the Dutch had coal, they could have been the start of the Industrial Revolution. The technology was not unique to England. The source of power, the source of steam power, was unique to England. China will eventually discover coal up north, away from the settled areas, so that it's difficult to get to. But in England, it's like right outside of London, and so that's one of the lucky things. Now that they start using coal to heat homes and do cooking in London, and then there are these inefficient steam engines that are used to pump water out of the coal mines, and you don't really care that they're inefficient because you own a coal mine, so you don't really care. You know, it's like if you had a gasoline refinery, you wouldn't care how much, how big your gas guzzling car was. You know, if you had an seemingly inexhaustible source of gasoline, you wouldn't care. These guys had a seemingly inexhaustible source of coal to provide, to run the steam engines. And then after a while, you think to yourself, well, we got the steam engine; it's pumping out water. Why don't we use it to bring the carts up and back and forth in the mine? They ran the carts on tracks with mules, basically to provide a solid, stable foundation. That's what the tracks were for. So then they're running a cable to run the cart into the mine and a cable to bring it back out. And then somebody gets the bright idea of putting the steam engine on the cart. And then you have a train. It's like, whoa, locomotion. And now we're getting there, but this is not the Industrial Revolution yet. Okay? Now you start laying down tracks for trains, and it's fortunate because the coal supplies are going further away. So it's harder and harder to transport it to London. But now you have a train. That works good. You need more steel. You need coal. You need more coal to power the engines, power the trains, the locomotives, and it kind of forms a feedback loop. Okay, we need to make steel. We need coal for that. We need to power the trains. We need coal for that. So we need more coal, and these things start developing pretty rapidly. Okay. But I don't really consider that the Industrial Revolution because it's still in the realm of producers' goods. Okay, it's steam engines, it's steel rails, and it's locomotives. When was the last time you went to the store to buy a steel rail or a locomotive? It's not the kind of thing normal people buy. Companies buy that. Manufacturers buy that kind of stuff. But the use of steam power quickly infiltrates the cotton textile industry. England has been in competition with India with cotton textiles. The Indians have been hand weaving cotton textiles for centuries. I don't even think you can grow cotton in England. Okay, I'm pretty sure that it's. I think in the United States, the most northern part of the United States where you can grow cotton is like southern Pennsylvania. New York City is on a line with Madrid, and England's way the hell up above that. I could be wrong about this because I'm not a farmer, and I'm certainly not a cotton grower. But you can't grow cotton in England. Not good cotton, anyway. Wool, you can raise sheep all you want and get good wool. But the cotton industry is new. It's not constricted by a guild. And so people start using steam power to do all these different things. They use it to spin the cotton into thread or yarn. And then they start and then there's this big surplus of yarn. So they start applying steam to the weaving, the looms. Okay? And to my mind, this is where the Industrial Revolution happens, when it becomes a consumer good. It becomes the kind of thing that anybody can buy. And that part of the Industrial Revolution is not a basically English thing. I've already mentioned that you cannot grow cotton in England. Where is the cotton coming from? Well, a lot of it's going to be coming from the United States, even after independence. In fact, I think the statistic is 1850. So 11 years before the Civil War, 1850, cotton, slave-grown cotton, is 3/5 of the exports of the United States. 60% of the exports of the United States are cotton. And probably almost all of it is going to England. All right? Now I'm going to try and wrap this up and just say, so you have a situation where the Industrial Revolution takes off in England, but it's dependent on extra acreage in the southern United States and an African American workforce that has been brought here. Without those two factors, I don't know. I don't know if you have an industrial revolution. Because the whole early history of the Industrial Revolution is textile factories, cotton textile factories. And so think about that. I mean, I don't mean to say that, I'm not saying that Western civilization is a fraud. But depending on how you really talk about it, it's either, it's maybe not the greatest thing since sliced bread, but maybe it's better than some systems. I don't know. But, you can't, it doesn't allow, however great or not so great it is, doesn't allow you to dismiss the kinds of horrible things that happened as it was becoming the top dog. All right. One last thing, I was looking through the I was looking through a number of different things, the artifact stuff and the discussion things. Please do me a favor. Do not use the word huge ever. If you have used the word huge, maybe go back and look at where you used it and think about what word you really wanted to use, or find a different adjective for that. Because the word huge has become like the catch-all adjective. Oh, it was a huge year. Well, what does that mean? Like 1,200 days in a huge year? He was a huge capitalist. How fat was he? I just read one. I just read one earlier, and I can't remember what it was. But it's you're never saying what you mean to say. You're saying huge, and then I have to say, huge means big. So a big year, a big capitalist. I don't know. Don't use it. Okay. It kind of like does that to me. All right. All right. 45 minutes. That's way too much. I know. I should be less long-winded, but some of the classes are an hour and 15 minutes long when they're and they meet twice a week. So I don't feel terrible. Oh, also, quite a few of my BAP students, and I don't even know how many I have. They don't tell me. Have reported having had COVID. So if you're on the BU campus, wear your mask, wash your hands. Don't be going to parties where people are unmasked and are in close proximity and singing to one another. You know, I got my first shot a couple of days ago, a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to get my second shot soon because I'm an old guy. And hang in there. Don't be. I know we want to go out and have good times. I would love to go gigging once more, but we can't. So be careful, right? I'll see you soon. Bye bye.